Chapter 10. Jesse arrived at Brie's apartment at 6 p.m. on the dot. Thankfully, there had been no calls at work, and the men had been able to relax a little. Jesse had even gotten to spend a little time with Bugsy before driving to Brie's. A rarity in his job. He often felt sorry for the dog. Jesse had gotten him when he first moved to New York, as he had wanted company. After joining SWAT, his time had dwindled, and Bugsy spent a lot of time alone. He paid for a dog walker for a few days a week, but he knew it wasn't the same. Still, he couldn't bear the thought of giving up Bugsy. The dog was still his companion when he was home, and Jesse wasn't sure he would stay in SWAT forever. Jesse pressed the doorbell, and a moment later Brie opened the door. Her soft pink sweater brought out a sparkle in her blue eyes and matched the color of her lip gloss. "You are punctual, aren't you?" Brie asked with a laugh. Jesse smiled back. He liked her laugh. It reminded him of the triangle he was forced to play in 3rd grade. Back then, everyone took turns on different instruments. Jesse loved the xylophones and the drums, but he had never enjoyed playing the triangle. It just hadn't seemed very important. However, he had always loved the sound, and Brie's laugh was light and tinkly like the triangle. "I try. It's sort of a requirement for the job. You ready?" "I am, but I have to warn you, I'm pretty good at skating. It was the one sport my father put me in that I actually enjoyed until it became too much work." She rolled her eyes and shook her head. "I really was spoiled." "Well, I grew up in the mountains of Montana. Believe me, I had plenty of practice skating. In fact, I was on our ice hockey team in high school." He had played a lot of sports in high school, but boxing and hockey had been his favorites. "Game on, then." She grabbed a bag and closed the door behind her. Jesse took her free hand, enjoying the feel of her smaller hand in his, and led the way to the elevator. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the rink. He had hoped if they came right around dinner time that it wouldn't be crowded, but it seemed several other couples had the same idea. They had to wait for a bench to clear before they could sit and lace up their skates. Jesse felt like a stalker as they waited between 2 benches. When the couple to the left stood, he and Brie swooped in and secured the bench, giggling like school kids who were breaking the rules. They took off their shoes and laced up their skates, then found a place to leave their street shoes. Jesse took her hand as they stepped onto the ice. It took him a minute to reacquaint his legs to the feel of ice beneath them, but soon it came flooding back. Brie must have had the same issue as she clung to his arm the first lap around, but by the second she was skating confidently. A few times she even let go to skate ahead of him and perform a fancy spin or jump. He smiled as he watched her. With her blonde hair flying out around her, she looked like an angel, and Jesse felt himself falling for her. Brie laughed as she spun and glanced back at Jesse. There was something about him that she found endearing, so much so that she knew she needed to tell him about the bet. But she didn't want to ruin the evening. Surely it could wait a little longer. She skated back to him and grabbed his hand again. Her nose was cold from the chilly air, and she knew her cheeks were flushed pink as well. "I'm hungry. Do you want to get a hot dog? I know of a great stand around here." "A hot dog?" He chuckled. "I kind of thought you'd be—" He paused as if searching for the right words. "A food snob?" she asked. A pink blush colored his cheeks, and she knew that was exactly what he had been thinking. "I wasn't going to say it like that. More like a refined palate." "I have one of those," she said, as they skated back to where they had placed their shoes. "But I also grew up with just my dad for most of my life. He used to take me to ball games and buy me hot dogs." Jesse's eyes lit up.
"Oh yeah? Who's your favorite team?"
"Well, I've always been partial to football, so I guess the Patriots." Jesse tisked and shook his head.
"You live in New York and you aren't a Giants fan? I don't know if we can still be friends."
Brie swatted his arm, though she knew he was kidding. He caught her hand and pulled her to his chest. Brie's breath stilled, and she smiled up at him. She liked the soft copper stubble that colored his cheeks and the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. His gaze held hers just a moment before he leaned down and kissed her. Heat flared across her lips and traveled through her body. She'd never felt such a connection with anyone before.
"Okay, I guess we can still be friends,"
Jesse said when he pulled back. The teasing glint still sparkled in his eyes. "Oh, good. So glad you agree." The two took their shoes to an empty bench and changed back into their regular footwear. Then Brie led the way out of the rink and to one of her favorite street vendors. Hot dogs were not her normal fare, as they weren't very healthy. But every once in a while, she just got a craving for a loaded dog. She recognized her favorite vendor as they approached. "Hey, Charlie, how's business been?"
"Not too bad. You know how it goes."
Charlie had a thick New York accent and always wore a derby atop his head. "Well, how about a little more business? Do you have a loaded hot dog for my friend Jesse and me?"
"Of course, anything for you, Miss Brie."
He loaded up 2 hot dogs and handed them over in exchange for the money Brie pulled out.
"I could have bought my own dog,"
Jesse whispered, as they wandered over to a nearby table. "I know, but it was my treat. You've been so sweet to me."
"I'm just glad the guys convinced me to give you a chance. I honestly thought it had to be a joke that you liked me. I'm not typically the one girls flock over. That's usually Brendan."
Brie's eyes dropped to her lap. There was no way she could tell him about the bet now. Even worse, she'd have to keep Ariel away from Jesse, or her friend might let it slip that she too had wanted Brendan at first. "Well, I'm glad you gave me a chance too." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their hot dogs, and then they walked back to Jesse's truck.
"Can I show you something?"
he asked as he opened the door for her. "Sure, I'd like that." The sun had set while they were skating, and only tiny streaks of pink still lit the sky at the horizon. Brie was sure the stars were beginning to emerge, but with all the lights in the city, it was impossible to see them. She buckled her seatbelt as he climbed in the driver's side and started the truck. He headed away from the city lights, and she wondered where they were going. Half an hour later, they were on the outskirts of the city, away from all the lights. Brie had never seen it so dark. Jesse pulled the truck over and opened her door. "What are we doing out here?" Brie hoped she hadn't misjudged him now that she was in the middle of nowhere in the dark with him.
"I thought you might like to see some stars. It's not quite the same way I grew up seeing them in Montana, but it's pretty close."
He lowered the tailgate to the truck and then grabbed a blanket from the cab and spread it out in the truck bed. He dropped the second blanket in the bed and held out his hand to her.
"Come on."
She took it and climbed into the bed beside him. He propped up some rope to make a makeshift pillow and opened his arm. Brie curled up against his chest and looked up. Then she gasped. The stars lit up the sky like tiny diamonds. "It's so beautiful. Is this how it looked in Montana?" Jesse chuckled.
"Not quite. It was even more impressive back where I grew up. There were fewer lights around."
"That must have been an amazing sight."
"It was, but not as beautiful as you."
He brushed her hair behind her ear and placed his lips on hers. Brie's pulse doubled, and a reckless feeling flooded her veins. Before anything more could happen, Jesse pulled back.
Sorry, I can't let it go any further. I want to, but I want to be married first, the way God intended it.
Brie blinked. You mean you've never... She didn't know how to finish the statement without a serious blush taking over.
I didn't say that. I wasn't always a Christ follower, and I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger. I'm trying to make fewer now.
Brie thought about that. She hadn't considered her past a mistake, but the more she revisited it, the more it made sense. After her last relationship ended, she had felt used and had wished she hadn't let it get as far as she had. Maybe there was something to waiting until there was a commitment. I admire that about you. She snuggled into his arms once again. Most guys I've known have only been after the prize.
He squeezed her shoulder. Don't get me wrong, I'm after the prize. I just want the forever one rather than the short-term one.
Brie smiled and shook her head slightly. If Jesus was what made Jesse so different, she was beginning to think she wanted him too.